Hello, good evening. I hope everybody's well. I see a few people joining already this evening. Hope that you have had a good weekend and Monday hasn't been too much of a slog. Let us know as well what you've been up to or what jobs that you've been to. Myself and Sam this evening are going to be taking you through a typical Q&A. So if you do have some questions, please start to pop them in the chat and we'll get through them to the best of our abilities. I believe it's only fair to ask Sam how he's been, how his weekend was.
Yeah, it was very good. Very good, thanks. It's getting cold now, but yeah, if you're an F1 fan, it was a cracking Formula One race yesterday. So
Yeah.
that was good to watch. Luton got beat, so we won't talk about football. But yeah, not a bad weekend.
We always need to talk about football. Please again do keep us updated with all the scores from this evening. Brighton and Southampton this evening. I'm hoping that Brighton come up with the goods just so it drops Arsenal down a little bit further as well. That would be magnificent. So, going to go through some questions. You may have seen before you joined us live on the screen that the DPC has 4 days to go. So the draft for public comment for BS 7671 Amendment 2. The draft that is available for comment from anybody that has a BSI account, which is free to do. There's 4 days to go, which is going to be a lot of comments going in, Sam, I would imagine, over the next 4 days. We as Searchshaw have put some in, and again, you can go on there and see what we've actually commented on as well. Have you had a chance to look at it personally, though, Sam? Is there anything that you jumps out that you would probably comment on personally?
Yeah, there's quite a few changes. Some things that we thought were going to be changed that perhaps haven't gone through this time, and some of the changes that they consider making, we're not really sure that they're right for the industry. So yeah, I think we got together. All of the technical people within Searchshaw were allowed to put their proposals in, and they've been sort of sieved through.
Yeah.
And I think we entered ours last week. So just to try and, if there in the past there have been problems of sort of an overload situation right at the end because everybody's just putting their comments in to meet the deadline. So yeah, I think as an organisation are in there.
Yeah. So again, remember Friday is the last day for your comments. The system itself is relatively easy to use. You can go on there and sift through the sections to the parts that will be affecting you. Will the DPC shop stop the rising damp? Good. Very funny. Very funny. I love the humour in here, guys. I do appreciate it. Let's start taking some questions then, and seeing where we're at, and hopefully we can sift through some of these. So, somebody said, please don't ask the same stuff as every week. I feel like scratching my eyes out. Listen, about that, there's new people that come in here that may not have joined us before, so they're quite entitled to their questions. We do try our best to not duplicate over the questions, but that's sometimes just the way it goes. Evening, I'm being 2P transferred on the 1st of April and I'm a QS. Will my status be 2P to the new company or will I lose it?
It's very dependent on your scope and responsibilities at the new company. So, for example, if they do the same things and you've got the same number of people, so effectively all your supervisory responsibilities are identical, then you can be transferred across. You will still be treated as a new applicant in some ways, but yeah, depending upon those finesses. So, for example, does the AE that you normally have assessing you look after both organisations if they're geographically close it's possible, in which case then he'll be able to have a good understanding of the scope for both businesses. So it's possible that it can be done without an additional QS assessment, depending also on when the next periodic assessment is for your new organisation.
Richard Harrison has put, our opinions won't matter anyway. They will do what they want in terms of the draft of public comment. They actually have to sit there and look and assess all of the comments, and some people may not believe that they are listened to, but they do have to be listened to. If they're valid comments and they're structured well and they've got a reason for your comment and a reason why you think that it shouldn't be in there, then they most certainly will be taking it seriously. Richard also has put in here as well that he hasn't got any questions. That makes a change, Richard. Normally you're the first person to start asking questions. We don't actually have that many at the minute, so if you do have a question that's burning, Richard, you can ask it. The chap that said about his transfer, Sam, said it's the same assessor and his assessment is in February.
So yeah, if the assessor knows the organisations well and can guarantee that that so the scope of work that they do under whichever scheme it is they're registered with is identical, your responsibilities are identical, then you'll be able to be transferred across, and then your assessment will be picked up in line with their periodic assessment. So there's a strong possibility you could get confirmation from your AE because he'll be the one that will know both organisations. Just picking up on the comment about the DPC as well, it is well worth, you've only got to look through the regs and see all the 201 regs, which those are the ones where we've got a UK requirement, because perhaps it's different with the rest of mainland Europe. So not everything does go through. You've only got to look at the country-specific regulations that are dotted around for one reason or another to show that it is worthy of people making a comment, definitely.
What's the current situation with assessments? Are they still virtual?
They're doing some which they refer to as a hybrid. So, for example, if you're talking about the periodic assessments or new applicant assessments, the office portion can be done remotely. If you're a new applicant assessment, you will need site visits, so you can't do everything remotely. If you're on a periodic assessment, it's possible that it can be all done remotely, depending upon how long you've been with us and how well the last assessments have gone. So it's possible, yeah, but a new applicant, it will be a hybrid. There can be part remote in order to try and cut down on the actual contact that needs to be made, but you will need to visit sites for an applicant.
Yeah. My yearly assessment is due in December and I've not heard anything yet. Will it be before Christmas? I think it would all depend, Sam, wouldn't it, on the assessor himself and how many visits already he's got booked in up until Christmas.
Yeah, they normally work on a 6-week cycle, so I'd be surprised if you haven't been contacted already. So please do check your emails and check your mobile messages. Because you should have been contacted. We've now only got effectively 3 working weeks, or slightly less than 3 working weeks till we break up for Christmas. So yeah, you should have been contacted if you've got an assessment in that date. But perhaps it's you're saying that the rough period is around Christmas, but you haven't actually been given a hard date yet.
Yeah. Jason's asked the question: Are Type A RCDs compulsory in BS 7671 or advisory compared to AC RCDs? Obviously depends on the install which type to use. We've seen that in the draft of public comments, and they've actually stated in there that if it does come in, they would like to see the Type A being used as a standard now, haven't they?
Yeah, so it'll become the de facto standard. So then you'll have a degree of DC tolerance regardless of where you're installing your RCD. Even currently, you'll find that in certain parts of the regs, in particular in the areas of special locations, there's a requirement for A's. So, for example, in 2.2 about vehicle charging as the special location, you've got to either use an A or a B, depending upon the level of DC current that the vehicle charging equipment produces. So in some instances it's already there, and yeah, the proposal is that the Type A will become the de facto standard, effectively replacing the standard AC one that we've got at the moment.
Just on that, Sam, I think we can say that if we was to use an AC now, it wouldn't be a typical or a general installation. We see everybody fitting LED lights of some description. That's as a minimum that they're fitting those. But I don't think you can look at an install now and say that an AC would be sufficient when quite clearly everybody has LED lights.
Yeah, if for want of a better phrase, if you're trying to make things as much future-proof as you can, then you want that benefit of DC tolerance.
Yeah.
Because as you say, there's so many things now, even in a standard domestic installation, that will produce DC current. So yeah, it's a very, very strong consideration even now. When it's not a requirement at the moment.
Yeah, now somebody, PSD Electricals put, guys, every person I ask who is domestic and not using Type A, they're using Fusebox Type AC because of the cost and the boards are decent. They may still be using them just for the simple fact that their installs are, general purpose and they don't have any DC specific in there. If we was looking at it from a coding perspective, Sam, so say that was happening, would there be any code that would need to be afforded to, if we went in and saw the install had some DC elements in there, would we be coding that differently?
Well, yes, it'd be advisable to see, is there any DC current flying around within the installation? So either try and specifically measure that, or test the RCD to see if it is being blinded or not. So obviously that's the potential issue, that DC current can effectively saturate the sensing coil of the RCD so that the magnetic effect to make it trip doesn't work. So it's something to consider on an existing installation with Type ACs. I think you've also got to remember, what's the RCD there for? So, for example, if you've already got basic and fault protection, and the RCD's perhaps only there for additional protection, then you're not looking at a potentially dangerous situation if you haven't got that additional protection requirement, so long as you've got basic and fault protection. So, it's generally a C3 issue if we haven't got the additional protection required. I appreciate in certain circumstances it would be considered a C2 as a requirement due to enhanced risk, for example, in a bathroom. But yeah, in general, it's a C3 if there's a general lack of the additional protection through an RCD. But yeah, it's something, as we said, although at the moment it's not a requirement to install Type A's in general installations, it should be a strong consideration on the basis that we know that DC current is about and the potential danger that could cause to a Type AC.
Okay. Does a KMF switch have to be in a steel enclosure? Some meter cupboards do not give you the space to install the steel KMF. What comes to mind here, Sam, is about switchgear and assemblies. Would I be right in thinking that perhaps if the KMF switch doesn't have any more MCBs or RCBOs to do it, so it affords that assembly, it wouldn't actually be required to be steel.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. So if we're talking about the requirement that was brought in for consumer units and similar switchgear to make them of a non-combustible enclosure, then yeah, that isolator, switch fuse isolator, KMF, however we want to describe it, doesn't fall into that bracket because it doesn't have the same degree of perceived risk, because it's something that will perhaps be installed fixed and then not liable to be altered or moved or added to in much the same way as a standard consumer unit could be. So no, we don't consider it to be similar switchgear in terms of a consumer unit where we've got circuit distribution.
Okay. If there are two distribution boards in a domestic property next to each other and the client wants an SPD fit in, would it require just one SPD to one board or one in each to protect everything in the installation?
Okay, if we're talking about putting SPD protection on that incoming service cable, then if we've got one supply coming in and it's somehow being split to feed both boards, then a single SPD would do, providing those two boards are within a 10 metre distance of each other. So
2 metre, no?
2 metres, you say?
Well, no, just thinking about, well, sorry, actually it should be within a metre of each other, should it not, with the cable runs?
Well, it depends on how the two boards are fed. So where that split is, it's possible that we could have an SPD before the split looking after the incoming service cable, and then that will look after any distribution within a 10 metre
yes, that's right, yeah.
Of that point. But yeah, as you say, it does depend on how that supply is brought in and split. So yeah, you could do it. But what you've also got to consider then is if you're in a type of installation or a location where you want to provide SPD protection, you've got to think about then further on within the installation, are there any further distribution circuits which go outside, any further types of services that come in from outside, which would also require the same degree of protection.
Probably worth asking the question as well, Sam, that does their client actually need that SPD for a start as well? I think that would be a good question to ask Ash on that one. Thinking of venturing into EV chargers once at the relevant course, do we Austin? Not too sure what that means. He's said, he's followed it up with another comment saying, do we register with EV companies? If you want to be on the OLEV grant, Sam, you would have to be speaking to the EV companies. But if you wanted to just come out of it and wanted to fit EV chargers not within the OLEV scheme, you could simply just do the course, understand what you need to do on the installation itself, and you wouldn't have to register with any EV company. But if you wanted to be part of that OLEV requirement, you would then have to register with the EV company, and you would have to. The company has to be registered. They have to register with the. Let me get this right. You have to. You have to speak to the manufacturer and go onto their register. Their products have to be registered. The car actually has to be on the register as well. And is there anything else on top of that? I think it was just the 3 requirements. So there's 3 registrations that you needed to be a part of to be in with the OLEV grant. But as I've said, you don't actually have to be registered with any of the EV companies if you don't want to be part of the OLEV. I believe Luden have done away with the ACRCBO. They supply A types of standards and it only costs £1 more. I think this will eventually phase out and it will be the general norm. My understanding is, Sam, that on the actual continent they don't even use AC. They've banned AC RCBOs or RCDs a long time ago.
Yeah, I think in general they were a little bit ahead of the game in that respect to us. And like you say, it was sort of a gradual phasing out of AC and transition to A's and B's. that they've done already. So I think we're then behind that. And then, as the caller mentioned, originally, if we go back, 2 years, the cost was quite a big differential, which some saw as prohibitive. There's now very, very little, and in some cases no difference in cost, which will then ease that transition from ACs to A's.
Okay. Is there any issue using a brand new BS3871 MCB to supply a new circuit from a MemShield 1DB, as they're still available brand new from MEM/Eaton?
Well, 3871s aren't in the regs currently anymore, so you would have to consider that, are they a suitable protective device? In reality, they're the British standard, so if they still comply and provide the degree of protection that's required, so whether it be overload, short circuit, or all fault, if they provide that degree of protection, you as the designer could choose to use them, but you would need to record that fact, because they're, as I say, they're no longer within 7671. My understanding, although I might be wrong on this, my understanding is that British standard has been superseded and effectively been replaced by 60898s. So it would be advisable to talk to the manufacturer to see if there is something that they don't do that are now that the 60898 standard requires to be provided.
How much?
It's certainly worth saying there's a lot of 3871s still installed out there, and providing we're meeting the ZSs and they're providing the correct degree of protection, then there's no issues with continued use.
Yeah. How much DC are we saying that saturates the RCD and blinds it? It's a good question.
It is a great question, and I'm going to take the old Fifth Amendment and say manufacturer dependent, because the manufacturers will tell us that they're, that's information that they keep, because obviously they don't want to say whether theirs is comparable with manufacturer X, Y, or Z. So we don't know. What we can say for certain is A's will cope with up to 6 milliamps, and type B's will cope with more than 6 milliamps. Exactly how much will blind an AC, I think you'll find that might change from manufacturer to manufacturer, but I think it's fair to say that definitely 6 mil would blind most of them, hence why the A's have been produced.
Okay. Quite a long-winded question. When doing an end-to-end reading of a ring and the CPC is, say, 1 ohm, more than expected, and when you've tightened the terminals on inspected sockets, the reading is still similar, if it's backed up by an RCD, would it be a code free as it's the function part of the circuit? If it was line conductors, I would say C2, code 2, yeah, so C2 for overheating. Am I right saying code free for the CPC? Depends on the length of the circuit as well, would it not?
Yeah, I think you've got to do those sanity checks to sort of say, okay, well, based on the length of circuit and the size of conductor, is the resistance, the end-to-end resistance, reasonable? So if not, then as the caller said, the first protocol would be to tighten up all the connections to make sure. But then you're looking at, okay, well, has the CPC got damaged? So are we talking about singles where it's more likely to get damaged than it would be in a twin and earth, for example? Because if twin and earth was damaged, we'd expect to see the same issues on all three conductors. So the advice would be, if providing you can meet the ZS at every socket on that circuit, and providing that you have got confirmation that you've got an R2 measurement at each and every socket in that circuit, and then lastly, providing you can confirm through the adiabatic equation that your CPC is large enough to carry the fault current for the time it takes to disconnect, then we wouldn't say it's a coding issue. What we would say is that you need to bear it in mind when you come to recommend the date for the next inspection, because what we want to see is, is it stable at that measurement, or is it getting worse? So obviously if it's getting worse, then that might result in a bit more of an FI issue, to go and do some more digging to find out what it is that's actually causing that higher than expected resistance. But providing you've got those three things, you can meet the ZS of your protective device, you've got an R2 at each and every socket outlet, and the third one, by doing the adiabatic equation, you can confirm that your CPC is large enough. We wouldn't see it as a danger or potential danger. So no direct requirement for a classification code, but consider factoring it in when you come to recommend the date for your next inspection, so that you can see whether it's getting worse or not.
Okay, there's a lot to take in there. For the OLEV scheme, you need to be part of a CPS scheme and have a registration with an EV supplier. No training is now required for the regulations, as they have changed recently by OLEV. Okay, something interesting. I haven't been aware of that change. Must have been a recent one.
I also thought that some of the manufacturers specified what training you had to have. So some of them insisted, for example, that you went on their own course in order for you to be registered to use their equipment.
Maybe
so that's interesting information.
Maybe they've changed it to say that if you are registered with a CPS scheme, you're being checked every year, so that there's not going to be any requirement to have any training on that, which is strange. This fuse box type AC, type A RCDs rumbling on in the background here, Sam. A lot of people are saying that they're using it. A few people are saying they're using Hager. Listen, guys, you can debate about your brands till the cows come home. That they do the job, and prices, etc. If you supply a subboard for EV charger rated a maximum of 32 amps via Henley blocks, would 16mm tails be okay, or does it need to be 25mm? If that makes sense. I think it all depend, would it not, on if there's any thermal insulation or anything like that. It's going through anything.
Yeah, you'd have to consider the route and the installation method, but generally 16mm tails will certainly cope with 32 amp.
Yeah. 1-0 Brighton, apparently. Good stuff.
Ooh.
Good stuff. It means Arsenal are going further down the table. Fuse box all the way. Brad said it's fed from a 100 amp main fuse. Maybe what he's trying to get to there, Sam, is that the fact of, we had a similar question last week, didn't we, about that fixed load driving the size of the cables.
Yeah. So obviously the 100 amp fuse won't provide overload protection for the 16mm tails, because the 16mm tails won't carry 100 amps. But we can rely on the load itself. So let's say, for example, we have got a one or two way board connected as the load, and the maximum demand through the protective devices of that load is 32 amps. Mm-hmm. Then we can rely on the load itself, but only for overload protection of the 16mm tails. We'll still have to meet the ZS of the 100 amp device to provide us with fault protection, short circuit, and earth fault protection. So yeah, we can rely on the load for overload protection, but only overload protection, and it has to be a fixed load, so something that's not going to exceed its design current.
3871, can they still be used if existing and there's a spare 387 left in the DB? So long as the 3871 that you're installing does meet the disconnection times. I believe where Sam was going with that was to say that maybe worth having a chat with the manufacturers about it. So if it was MEM or Eaton, for example, then maybe have a chat with them and just see if there's any difference between the 3871, because that British standard has been superseded by 60898. So it may be worth just having a chat with them as well. Has there been any discussion regarding EICR legislation for commercial/industrial properties? Cool. I think we're asking for a bit much there. It's taken us this long to get the private rented sector legislated, Sam. I don't believe there's any talk on the cards unless you know any different.
No, not at the moment. At the moment, it's purely residential, and yeah, it's a question we get asked quite often because sometimes larger landlords are landlords of both types of installations. So yeah, at the moment, it's only associated with residential, and even then, there are some exceptions. So, for example, hostels is one that springs to mind, and student union accommodation. Student accommodation. So yeah, it is at the moment only residential.
Mm-hmm. Are the disconnections times not in the Big Blue Book for 3871s?
No, not for 3871s. No, 3871s got stripped out some while ago. They weren't in the Yellow Book either.
Okay. Well, the questions. PRS scheme in Wales, is that going to become is it going to become compulsory? Again, I think they may follow on from what we're doing here in England, but I haven't heard anything yet, Graham, and there's not really been any talks about that. I do inspections in industrial sites, and it's a nightmare. I guess he's following on from the previous question about the legislation. They can be, and I think it's one of those ones. That Sam, as soon as people start to add things into the installation, that's when it starts becoming a problem, and that's when the inspections start to have to see higher percentage of items being inspected.
Yeah, I think the PRS section was chosen because of that perceived risk. There was a greater risk to the tenants because they're actually tenanted there, often asleep in the premises, where electrical issues could cause danger, in particular with respect to fire. So the perceived risk was greater in PRS. I fully appreciate, I've come from an industrial background, and I know it's not always the case, but in many industrial installations, there is preventive maintenance. There's a maintenance regime. Those kind of things don't tend to happen as well in the private rented sector. So that's why that's been chosen for the first stage. Who knows? Eventually, it may come in. I mean, in those places, you've also got to consider electricity at work regulations, which talks about having regular maintenance to ensure the safety of the electrical installation for continued use. So it's kind of driven that way as well, but currently not legislated for.
Yes, people are just talking here as well, so they're saying that they're in one today. It makes your toes curl. Landlords need a kick up the rear of commercials, and then somebody else followed on, which I was going to comment after I saw that one, saying insurance companies are becoming more insistent on EICRs for commercial and industrial. If they haven't got them, the chances of them paying out are very, very slim, because if it was to be deemed that it was an electrical fault, that's the first thing they're going to ask. They're going to say, when was the last time you had it checked? So it's either way you push it and say that it's something that you need to have done. Depends on the type of landlord, and I think we saw that for a long time, Sam, especially in the private rented sector. There was a varying difference between different landlords. There were some that were really good, and there was some that wasn't to the best standard. So I think it's always going to be the way, and until it does become legislation as well. Last question then before we start to wrap it up. To gel or not to gel? I like the Whisker IP rated boxes for outside joints. What is your thoughts on the long-term sealing up of the connections inside, as have had moisture / condensation found in some boxes?
It's a potential problem once we go outside and the environmental conditions. Get a connection point that's fully equipped for the type of environment. Even if you're not burying it, if it is just external, please make sure that it is suitable for that environment, because, you know, it's amazing the amount of twin and earth and the amount of standard domestic junction boxes we see externally. And then when they're opened up and there's all sorts of life inside that box, that you know, you wouldn't bear in mind. So yeah, properly sealed, suitable for the environment.
Yeah, someone's put in here saying use the gel. There are other brands available. We're not going to sit here and say there's not. We obviously can't be brand biased, but you know, Whisker Gel is there. It does a job, and if you get any complaints or you get any problems with it, be sure to call them, because I know one of the guys there at Whisker. He's a top guy, and he'll do everything he can to try and sort out any issues that you have with any of their products. Well, Sam, we've hit 100 comments this evening. I think that was mainly people talking to each other, but nonetheless, we've still added some cracking questions. But for tonight, I think we'll leave it there. We've done sort of 35 minutes at what we normally do. Is there anything else you want to add in?
No, that's it. I mean, yeah, well, it's great that they're talking to each other. That's one of our roles as well, because hey, we all learn off each other. So that's brilliant.
Good stuff. For myself and Sam for this evening, I'd like to say good night and enjoy the rest of your evening. And we will be back next Monday again around about 8 o'clock for some more Q&A. So if you do have any questions throughout the week, save them up for next Monday, and we'll talk them through. Thank you very much.